Nancy, by the way, Nancy Spannaus is a public historian who, in her own words, has spent the last 50 years trying to rescue what she considers the true American revolutionary principles. She began in political economy with Alexander Hamilton and published Hamilton versus Wall Street in 2019. I love that book, by the way. I love that book. It's another re-understanding of that particular great American. Her second book took on the issue of slavery, arguing that Hamilton's industrialization program was a key to ending the slavery situation, the institution, without a civil war. And her third, just published 3 months ago, directly addresses the 1760 to 1787 revolutionary period, challenging citizens to take a new and deeper look at what the revolution is all about. I think that she actually couples very nicely with what Sean was talking about. Hey, Nancy, welcome back. It's good to have you again. Happy 4th.
Oh, happy 4th to you. Yeah, I saw you had Sean on first. You know, as you probably know, I have a speech by Sean in my book, and actually got this idea or congealed this idea of subject to citizen, with inspired by him in part, by what he said went on in the First Continental Congress.
And
it's very...
It worked out perfectly because, Sean looks at that cauldron, that 74 to 76 cauldron, but you take a bigger view. You actually look at 1760 to 1787 because that is the long enculturation. That is the long process of becoming. And of course, we continue to become, to form that more perfect union as we talk about. But can you give our listeners a sense of what it is Americans need to know about their revolution? To go right to the subtitle of the title. How do we move from subject to citizen? Take us through it.
Well, I think that the first thing we do is we really recognize that we've taken a very shallow approach and taken a lot for granted in terms of what our revolution was intended to do. The revolution was not the same as the Revolutionary War. When the war was over, we still had a lot of work to do, as Benjamin Rush, one of our founding fathers, said right before the Constitutional Convention. So, and people were relative to the rest of the world, they were informed by having done a lot of reading and thought about what's involved in good governance, as you would say today. What they would say is a government that puts the general welfare of its population first. They actually argued that the king was illegitimate because he was not putting the welfare of the population first. So the book goes through the build-up, of long-term grievances like economic grievances, and then other hot-button issues. For example, this question of taxes, which, in fact, I had a friend who really emphasized this point. Americans did pay taxes. In fact, they wanted to pay the taxes to pay their governor because they wanted to have some control over what that governor was going to do. And when the British decided to put the Stamp Act on, specifically to pay to police them, to pay for the army here, which was more troops than had been here during the French and Indian War, and began to use that to fund the administration of smuggling laws and other kinds and the courts and the governorships. They said this is tyranny, and we're not going to go along with this. So, but then you get to the question of, well, how do you establish institutions which make those changes? We go from a situation where we are freeing ourselves from an oppressive government to having a government that works for the general welfare of the population. And those ideas that go into that There are a couple extensive articles in this book. It's really it's 22 different essays, mostly by me, but Sean and my husband get a couple licks in there. And
Speaking of the Stamp Act, I'm sorry, I couldn't let that stand. I'm sorry. Go ahead, continue.
Go ahead.
No, I just was saying, speaking of the Stamp Act, he got his licks in there. I just wanted to make sure that pun got included in this conversation. Go ahead, Nancy. Thank you.
Well, do you want me to repeat that? Did that go too fast?
No, Nancy. I was making the joke. He said your husband got his licks in, and I was making a joke about the Stamp Act.
Okay, I guess I'm a little slow on the uptick this morning.
Hey, come on!
It's a holiday.
You got up early on a holiday to join us on Revolution Road. Of course, we're all a little slow. Nancy, I wanted to ask you a question to kind of go back just for a second to kind of dig in, because you said a lot of interesting stuff that you just unpacked, and we talked a little bit about this with Sean, but there's maybe a way you can deepen this. Can we make the argument that so much of who we become is about what we never want to happen again? Is that so much of our political documentation, so much of what we kind of codify as law is based on those terrible experiences that happened towards the end of British rule? The idea that it's like, how do we ensure not only do the British never do this to us again, but how we as a country never fall into the trap of dealing with quartered soldiers, dealing with with kind of plenipotentiary decisions when it comes to the raising of revenue against us, to shutting down our trade routes. How much of who we are is based on what we don't want to be? Make sense?
I think to a lot of people that is the view. They are looking at what they don't want to happen again. But my implicit argument, and it's not a preachy book, right? It's not like I lay out a clear thesis and then, logically prove it, right? I'm poking holes in some of the things that people take for granted, and I'm trying to challenge people to think in a slightly different way about what we were trying to do. A citizen at the time, to go from a subject to a citizen is a much deeper question. These people had an idea of citizenship which went back to Cicero, right? To the idea of connecting your commitment to the general welfare of your society with your own personal one. They weren't necessarily at odds. And unfortunately, some of the tendency of many people who supported the revolution was that they simply it was a libertarian view. It didn't really include the welfare of anybody but me, myself, and I, right? And I tell people that if they don't read anything else in this book of the longer articles, they should read my reprint of Abraham Lincoln in 1838, where he says, how do we save our republic? Because there gives a very thought-provoking modern analysis that you can agree with parts of and not agree with other parts of, but it's definitely worth thinking about, of what sustained our republic for, at that time, about 50 years, and what was necessary to continue to sustain our republic for the good and welfare of the entire population.
I'm actually going to take a little detour here into our listeners, many of whom are over-the-road independent truck drivers. And there is an award that is given out every year. Dave Nemo and my co-host from time to time, from the last 2 hours of this show on a regular basis, Lindsay Lawler, are responsible for picking the winners. It's called the Citizen Driver Award. And what they're looking for is they're not looking for people who have 4 million safe driving miles. They need to have that as well. That needs to be foundational. They need to be a completely qualified, competent business owner or great employee who drives safely on the road, who makes money for the company and all that kind of stuff. What they're really looking for, Nancy, and it's really cool, is looking for citizens. They're looking for people who are Little League coaches, people who are involved in Big Brother, Big Sister programs, people who are volunteer firemen, people who do EMT work, all the other stuff too. And it seems to me that part of what you're arguing in that essay that you're talking about is that, the libertarian view means keep driving safely, drive safely so you can make more money, take care of you and yours, and cash in your check and go home. And by the way, that can make a very good employee. What these people are looking for when they pick the winner is people who are very connected and understand that their driving and their embrace of their communities makes them a better citizen driver. And so this is kind of the struggle that you're looking at, that the complexity of citizenship, talking about it through the filter of Cicero, the idea that, go back to John Donne's quote, "No man is an island," and the idea that they really, many of the founding fathers are deeply invested in the idea of even the smallest sharecropper, even the smallest farmer, the smallest craftsman, having a direct connection to their fellow citizens and understanding that in protecting their rights, they're protecting the rights of all. Is that kind of what we're talking about?
That's very interesting that you give that reward. I congratulate you on that.
Well, thank you. And it's the hardest decision they have to make. By the way, it is an agony. You ask Dave and Lindsay, and they hate it because the last 10 are just extraordinary.
They're all deserving.
They got to pick 3, Nancy. It's agonizing for them at the end. So,
right.
Is that what you're getting at?
Well, it's a little more than that because I think people have to be also. It seems impossible to them because people are the individuals find, well, I'm so stacked up with my things to do in my life that I couldn't possibly think about how the country should be run, right? Or what our economic system should be at the top. But our revolution came out of people who were definitely thinking about that. They were thinking about it from of connecting their own welfare with how the government institutions were going to promote or go against that, and learning something about government, which doesn't mean that everybody should run for office or sit at the polls or something like that, but it means being informed. Read a very interesting article not too long ago about cultural shifts in the United States from the idea that from a period which really was hit a high point at the end of the 19th century, I think, where people were totally energized with debates about how the economy should be organized, to the period of this article argued that the period of the 1920s when we became a consumer society, and what you were interested in was, what you could buy, whether your truck was flashier than their truck. I don't know. Did you get the best deal? A consumer society, something that not what you contribute, but what you get for a buck, right? And it's a totally different relationship to your fellow citizens. And I think that's slightly more directly what I'm after.
Yeah, and it's interesting too that you would pick the 20s. That that the thing that you were reading and referring to would pick the 20s. We're going to go all over. This is not just about the American Revolution, but the ongoing American Revolution. You make a case that part of the reason the 20s happens is the messianic urge of the Wilson administration, which of course then kind of culminates in our entry into World War One. Which, by the way,
Right.
I looked at that history. We should have been involved in World War One. The Kaiser was a bad dude, and there's a lot of reasons for us to get involved. That being said, there were a lot of Americans who ended up getting incredibly exhausted, because that's the thing too, is that the kind of citizenship you're calling for, and the kind of citizenship that the founding fathers, many of them, were deeply invested in, the Ciceronian model of it is, I always say, this is America. Put your big girl pants on, put your big boy pants on, and get involved. But that really can be exhausting, can it not, Nancy? I mean, the idea that
absolutely, it can be exhausting.
Kicking
But
the
I
ass,
think
you know,
that,
right? Go ahead.
So what? I mean,
I'm with you.
You've got you've got a future to think about. As far as I know, I mean, you, Jimmy, you've done a lot of history work. Maybe you know better. But as far as I know, we're the only constitution in the world that actually makes a commitment for our posterity. That one of your judgment parameters for what your policies of the government should be is that it's good for the people who come after you, right? Which, by the way, is totally the opposite of what the complicated character Thomas Jefferson thought. He thought, we should start with a clean slate every 25 years. And other founding fathers thought that was quite irresponsible. You have to set up institutions which are actually going to produce good, even when people don't automatically come to that conclusion to do it on their own.
It's interesting too, Nancy, because the intellectual heft of the argument that gets this country going that may be the greatest institution that we have founded here. And that's why I always worry about when anybody shows up, and I always make the joke, P.J. O'Rourke, God rest his soul, once said that he was always very wary of anyone who actually wanted to call the police. And what he meant by that was of he would call it stasis, and the idea of that what Jefferson and Hamilton in particular engage in early on in the Republic. And by the way, I agree with you in regards to the posterity approach. The idea is that because our Constitution also leaves room to amend and change,
absolutely,
that's the open door. That's the one that says you can get rid of some of this stuff and you can add some stuff as well. Now, it takes a big mechanism to do it, and we should have a conversation about that as well, too, at some point. But part of what I think the posterity is the argument, is the fact that we figure out really quickly that Washington doesn't eliminate his enemies, that Jefferson, when he assumes power, doesn't begin a long-term strategy to eradicate any Hamiltonian thinkers. He might not like them, and he might make life difficult for them, but with the exception of Aaron Burr, nobody's looking to give anybody the business in the early Republic and basically establish themselves as the only true system of governance. Is that fair?
Well, on the whole, it's fair.
Well, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, we all have our moments. We have our moments.
For example, you probably are aware, Jefferson was quite determined that Hamiltonian economics not be taught at the University of Virginia, right?
Oh yeah.
So, doesn't really go together with this whole freedom of speech idea. But in terms of totally wiping the slate clean, no, not at all. And he was prevented from doing that actually by Gallatin.
Who you have written extensively about, by the way, and I think in many ways you are one of the people who's actually really helped kind of bring Americans awareness of Gallatin, by the way. And by the way, Thomas Jefferson had an odd habit of saying, what is good for thee is not always good for me, and therefore I actually have no problem with a very proactive, overreaching federal government when it comes to purchasing a large plot of land from Napoleon for $15 million.
Yeah, right. I don't have a problem when it's what I want to do. That's absolutely true.
Yeah, or when it opens up land for my constituents, the dudes that like me, those farmers. Man, if I can get them some more land, I am more than happy to embrace Hamiltonian methodologies. More than happy
Right.
to jump into the game, right?
And certainly to spend the money that was accumulated under the Hamiltonian policies, which I mean, it wouldn't have without the credit policies of Hamilton, we wouldn't have had the credit to be able to
Wait, Nancy,
actually carry out that purchase.
Nancy, are you telling me this country has a 250-year tradition of one party actually basically cleaning up the books and making things right, and then the other party who rails against all of that kind of stuff coming in and spending that money? I'm shocked. I'm I'm stunned. I'm sorry. Let's get back to your book, though. Like I said, we've covered a couple of things here, though. I'd like to keep talking about the idea of from subject to citizen, because I feel like today we've had this really great moment. We had on the former Undersecretary of the Navy, Patrick Murphy, who has of Army. I'm sorry, I said Navy, didn't I?
You did.
I did. Shame on me. Former Undersecretary of the Army. He would kill me if he was in fact listening, but he's on the beach right now with his son flexing. But basically, he talks about the idea of that all the time. It's a big passion project for him of getting veterans involved both in the public and private sectors vigorously. He calls them veteranpreneurs. And so much of Hamilton's vision of the country, while there was a big bank and while there was a bureaucracy and all that kind of stuff, he really was a small business friend, correct? I mean, there really was a vision of helping people getting going. He wanted an activist government to help people get going.
In fact, one of the experts on Hamiltonian economics, this guy Richard Silla, excellent illustrated biography of Hamilton, by the way, points out that his Society for Useful Manufacturers, the organization which became Paterson, New Jersey, that this was actually a multi-industrial thing, and that they provided credit for startups, right, for small guys, right? So it wasn't like your Lowell, Massachusetts, where you had a family fortune and somebody looking for to set up a company town. You did provide the basis for people to actually start this operation. Contrary to what most people think about Hamilton under these circumstances, but Jefferson. Lincoln, followed through on Hamilton. That friend also pointed out correctly, I think, that to a large extent, Lincoln did what Hamilton would have wanted to do.
Yeah, you can, you've argued that, by the way, that Lincoln, in many ways, is kind of the fruition of the Hamiltonian view of government, and the Republican Party of 1854, 1856, the one that springs into life. It figures itself out by the time it gets to 1860 and becomes, in many ways, the vision of what Hamilton had. Nancy, really quickly, I wanted to let you know that along with enjoying the conversation we're having with you this morning, a lot of our listeners are actually talking about the donuts that they're trying to avoid to eat. And so, speaking of things to eat, they really are, by the way. They literally are online saying, we're really enjoying this conversation, and then they get into the sidebar about literally the Clearwater, Minnesota restaurant at the fuel stop. If you can make it past the pastry counter, there's a lot of great stuff to eat in the restaurant. What are you having? What are you doing for 4th of July? We're almost out of time. So what are you doing for the 4th? What are you going to do?
Well, I'm at a family reunion with my husband and son. So we're in Detroit, and we are going to have a barbecue. We're celebrating the wedding of one of my husband's nephews, and it's going to be a lot of conversation. These are all people who are very involved in a citizen way. I may not agree with everything they're involved in, but at least they are willing to discuss it. They're not about to say, politics and economics are off the agenda, because I mean, the thing is that I'm sorry I don't have an audiobook for probably very popular with your constituency.
Oh, yeah.
But
I got one. By the way, I
my,
have one listener, Nancy. He literally has 600 audiobooks in his queue. He's actually listened to 600 audiobooks in his queue. If you ever want me to
it's
read it
so
for you,
expensive.
I get you
It's
some
so
voices.
expensive. It's so expensive. I'm not sure that I can actually do that. So, but if people don't, but the one thing I really take issue with is this idea that, people don't read anymore, so we should just adapt to their new, shorter
No,
attention span.
no, not true. People are
And
reading just fine.
is,
Yeah.
this is just, I say, well, if that's the case, we're sunk because you're not going to have a viable country if people decide that they aren't going to improve their knowledge and their commitment to knowledge, which is one of the fundamental things all the way from Washington forward. And that's what we'll be doing. In fact, I'll be selling books to my relatives. I sell them to my doctors. I sell them to my relatives. Because I can tell you, I have a very serious form of cancer at the moment. But people say, well, what can I do for you? And I said, well, you can buy a book.
Well, good gosh almighty.
Better yet, you could read it.
By the way, I actually will buy 2 copies today. I promise you, and I will give one to my father and one to my brother. I got to cut you loose, Nancy, because we're out of time. I want everybody to keep on reading at AmericanSystemNow.com, by the way. Nancy, love you. It is so good to have you back.
Oh, I really enjoy talking to you, Jimmy. Really do. Okay. So you have a wonderful 4th.
You too as well. May the 4th be with Nancy always, because she, by the way, Greg, is a great American.